Hey class, I want to review with you just the basis of what a fraction is. Because we can do a lot of things with fractions, like comparing fractions so that we can compare amounts in real life, or adding and subtracting fractions. A lot of numbers are not whole numbers; they come in forms of parts of whole numbers, and that's kind of that's not what kind. That is what a fraction is. A fraction is when you actually split some whole thing in real life into certain size pieces, and all the pieces are the exact same size. And so fractions really are a form of division, okay? And I really think that's why some kiddos like yourselves have trouble with it, is because division is usually one of the harder operations to master it. It's the very last one that you kind of formally learn about in school, and it takes a lot of higher level thinking because there's a lot of things involved with division, and so fractions can be a little tricky. So if fractions are not your best friend, do not stress about it, because it does take some practice. It does take work with it in real life, and to think about it in real life stories and situations to be successful with it, okay? So there are some things that you really have to have a good grasp on in order to be successful with fractions, and that is understanding what the parts of a fraction tell you, okay? Because in the fractions that you see, there are two numbers involved. Generally, they're different numbers, and you have to know what those different numbers mean and what that fraction bar means. And so you can always learn what they're called, but you really need to understand what they mean. What do they represent? So the bottom number here is called the denominator. And this is how I learned it as growing up, and it was just my own little way of remembering. D is also the first letter of down, and so down is like bottom, and so that's how I remember what the bottom number of fraction is called, D, down, denominator. And then the top number of the fraction is called the numerator. But it's not just okay just to know what those things are called. You need to know what they mean when it is referring to a number. So a denominator tells us that, hey, you have a whole, and you're splitting that whole into that many same size pieces. Notice me saying the pieces are the same size. If they're not all the same size, then you're not really identifying a fraction of that whole. So I have a couple of drawings over here. One is a rectangle, and this is more commonly what you see or think of when you're starting to learn about fractions, is taking like a shape and splitting it into equal groups. And so if I were to split this rectangle, and if I'm going to say that this is my whole, I'm going to label that and say 1 whole, just so I have a frame of reference of what my 1 whole is, because the fraction is always referencing some sort of whole, no matter what it may be. Now, this may be 1 whole pizza, it may be 1 whole candy bar, it might be 1 whole dollar, it might be 1 whole hour, it might be a whole foot, it might be a whole, it could be a whole anything, okay? We've got lots of objects in this world, lots of things in this world, so it could be a whole of anything. And we're going to split that 1 whole of something into 3 equal parts. The denominator tells me so. Remember that little doodah we sing sometimes? So the 3 tells me to split this into 3 equal parts. So, of course, we're human. We're not robots. We're not machines. We're not going to make these exactly perfectly when we're sketching it out, but we need to do the best that we can to make it look like we are attempting to make equal parts here. So 3 equal parts. That's my denominator. The denominator tells me so. How many equal parts are in the whole? The denominator tells me how many parts are in the whole. There we go. Okay, so then what does the numerator tell us? you can think of numerator like number. The number of pieces that we're identifying out of the total number of pieces in our whole. So the numerator tells me, hey, you're identifying, you're going to talk about 2 of those out of those 3 pieces. So I'm going to shade in 2 out of those 3 pieces. Like if that was a pizza, maybe I say that I ate 2/3 of the pizza. Okay, and so me marking that, I'm saying I'm eating 2 out of 3 equal pieces of that whole pizza. Okay. Now you'll notice underneath here, I also have a picture of, I tried to make them look like apples, simple picture. Let's say this is the apples that I bought at the store the other day. I bought 3 apples, so that's my whole set. And so sometimes fractions can refer to a whole set. And sometimes your sets can have multiple things, like I could have made 6 apples in my set, or 9 apples, or 12 apples, or 10 apples, or 13 apples, or 47 apples. So sometimes we take fractions of a whole set. This one I made very simple. I made each apple be 1/3, okay? And I've shaded in 2 of them. So 2/3 of the apples are green. That means 1/3 is not green. So that's my whole set. So that's how you can see fractions of a set. Like if I wanted to make, just real quickly, maybe instead of having 3 apples in my set, maybe I have 6 apples in my set. Now, if I wanted to shade in so that 2/3 of them are still green, I would need to shade in these apples as well. Now, can you see the 3 equal parts there? Hopefully, 1, 2, 3 equal parts in my set, and 2 of them are completely shaded green. So I can still say 2/3 of my set are green. So 2/3 of the set, or 4 apples out of the 6 apples, are green. So that is a way to interpret, those are some different ways to think about how fractions represent things in real life, okay? So as sets, or kind of like as regions of something, or like I said, wholes can represent anything, dollars, hours, mail that you bring in, whatever, I don't know. So that's the basis of a fraction. Now, you'll also see in real life that there are different types of fractions. And we had a tree map in class that was blue, and I'll try to remember to post a picture of that tree map, of the types of fractions that you can encounter in real life. And one type of fraction is just like this up here. It's just a regular old proper fraction, and usually we don't even say proper, we just call it a fraction, or a fraction less than 1. And that's where the numerator is smaller than the denominator, okay? And so it's always a fraction that's less than 1. So I'm going to put fraction less than 1 here. 1/4, 1/2, anything with a numerator of 1 is going to be a proper fraction. And then always remembering that the numerator is smaller than the denominator. So 2/3, 4/6, 5/6, 3/12, 50 hundredths. Those are all proper fractions because they have a value of that's less than 1 whole. Okay. Another type of fraction that you will see is an improper fraction. And although it makes it sound like there's something wrong saying that's improper, there's nothing wrong with this fraction. It's just the opposite of what a proper fraction looks like. And that's where actually the numerator is larger than the denominator. So let's say that the 3 is now the numerator and the 2 is now the denominator. We read that as 3/2. And what we're saying is the 2 is now how we're splitting up our wholes. So my whole, if this is my 1 whole, I'm splitting it into 2 equal parts. But I need to shade in 3 of them. I need to identify 3 of them. Well, that means I'm going to have to draw a whole nother hole. Funny. Give that as a reference, 1 whole. and I shade in 3 out of 2 equal parts. So I'm going to end up with 1 whole and a half. So 3 halves is actually greater than 1. So an improper fraction actually can be a fraction that's exactly equal to 1 or greater than 1. And the way that it is equal to 1 is in the special case like if the numerator and denominator are exactly the same and you have 2 halves. You see that? And that's where we would just have 1 whole, split it in half, 2 equal parts for the denominator, and we would shade in 2 of them. Well, that is just 1 whole, right? So, an improper fraction is any fraction that's equal to or greater than 1, meaning that either the numerator is the same as the denominator or the numerator is bigger than the denominator, okay? So it's going to be greater than or equal to 1 whole. And then there's one other type of fraction that we have, and that's called a mixed number. And a mixed number plays off of an improper fraction because it's the other way to write the improper fraction. Right here, we have 2 improper fractions, but we can actually change those into what we call a mixed number. And I always like to say a mixed number is like a mix of a whole number and a fraction, because what's another way that we could actually write 3 halves? If we write how many wholes there are, then that would be 1 whole, and how many halves? 1 half. Right? So a mixed number is a mix of a whole number and a fraction, or it's just like when you turn it, the improper fraction, it just becomes the whole number if all the parts end up being shaded out of wholes. Okay, so 1 whole. So a mixed number is also greater than or equal to 1, and is a mix of the improper or it is a mix of the whole number and the fraction that's less than 1, okay? So I'll put a picture of that tree map so that you get more of the definition and what they're equal to and what they look like on the comments after this video, okay? So that's just an overview of what a fraction is if you needed a review for that. So if you need any help or if you have questions or need something specifically on here explain to you even more, like improper fraction and mixed number, please let me know, and I can make just a special video on that if I need to. So have a great day.